Welcome to the Danny Clinkscale Reasonably Irreverent podcast. Insightful and witty commentary, probing interviews, and detours from the beaten path.
Welcome to Weekend Sports Watch here on the Danny Clinkscale Reasonably Irreverent Commentary and Podcast at DannyClinkscale.com. Hope you had a wonderful 4th of July weekend. The weather was certainly not ideal, pretty gooey, but we avoided a lot of rain, so people got to do their 4th of July activities and have a great time doing it, and I hope you did. And there certainly were a lot of sports activities going on around the nation and the world. And it's difficult for any community to tab themselves as the center of whatever. Kansas City has made the claim to be the soccer capital of the United States, and who knows, somebody else could make that claim, and Atlanta could now because they draw 80,000 fans to soccer games down in Georgia and regularly average 65. But for one weekend anyway, it certainly appeared that Kansas City can make that claim. And how did Kansas City shine yesterday as the women won the World Cup? That's a national story. That's an international story. But what was the first image after the game ended and they showed about 2 or 3 minutes of celebration? It was the celebration of the thousands of fans who gathered at the Power and Light District, and they highlighted that it was in Kansas City. So that certainly capped what was a great weekend for Kansas City and a pretty good sports weekend overall, as we have a lot of things to talk about today, but certainly the Women's World Cup was at the heartbeat of it as the women won their second consecutive World Cup, and it's the first time that that has happened since Germany did it, and only the second time that it's happened ever. And though those women who have captured the hearts, and maybe not minds, but the hearts of people across the United States certainly have made a tremendous impact, and millions of people have watched, many of whom probably don't care that much about soccer, but maybe now they do. That was at the centerpiece of what went on in sports this weekend around the country and around the world, and highlighting Kansas City as well. And we'll talk about that, baseball, other soccer, lots of stuff to deal with on the Weekend Sports Watch, and it comes your way next. We're here with Joe Spiker, the president of Easton Roofing. And Joe, you worked for other companies in the construction industry. What inspired you to start your own company in Easton Roofing?
Well, you know, Danny, when you are working for somebody else, you oftentimes don't get to see the project through from beginning to end, and you don't get the final control over the customer experience. And I wanted to build a place where people can come and get work done on their house and not have to worry about being treated the wrong way, and get a good customer service experience start to finish.
The company slogan is "Where Integrity Matters." Why is that so particularly important to you?
Well, for us, what that means is treating each other with respect at work, treating our clients with respect, and making the right choice, especially when no one's looking. So when you're presented all the time as a contractor with choices that have to be made, are you going to make more money on this if you cut a corner? And we just wanted to make a place and a slogan that said to our people and to whoever is our customer, we're not going to do that. We're going to make the right choice regardless of profit.
Easton Roofing, where integrity matters. Get a refreshing change of your expectations of a sports bar and restaurant at the 23rd Street Brewery in Lawrence. Matt Llewellyn's welcoming spot at Clinton Parkway in Cassold covers all the bases, like their own handcrafted beers and all the televisions you need for great sports viewing. But it's the large, varied, and delicious menu that stands apart. From a favorite of mine like the awesome ahi tuna appetizer to great sandwiches, outstanding pizza, and truly fantastic entrees, the 23rd Street Brewery has it all. Matt and his friendly staff make it that much more enjoyable. Food until 10, fun until late. The 23rd Street Brewery is a can't-miss stop when you are in Lawrence.
For many people, a family law case will be one of the most difficult experiences in their life. The law firm of Kenneth McRae will help you through it. Personal and effective help from Ken in concert with you will develop a unique strategy for your unique case. As Ken always says, divorce can be civil law, not civil war. Licensed in Kansas? Visit McRaeLawOffice.com or call 913-972-4765.
Welcome back, and it wasn't necessarily the most compelling match in the Women's World Cup final, but it's the most compelling team, that's for sure, as the U.S. women's team overcame kind of a flat game for a while, cagey game for a while, and ended up being a dominant performance by the U.S. women as they beat the team from the Netherlands by a count of 2-0. As I mentioned, the game was one of those that the old soccer phrase goes, this game needs a goal, and it kind of did, as the first half was not electrifying, to say the least. The U.S. controlled the play, but not remarkably. And then into the second half, where just after the 60th minute or so, Megan Rapinoe was able to slot home a penalty. It was done by VAR as a high boot struck on Alex Morgan, and it certainly was the right call. And the thing about penalties in soccer that really has been something that is one of the few things that bothers me about the sports is I think they're just too penal. I think and nobody agrees with me on this, but I think they should move the penalty spot back for one. I think that would allow perhaps more penalties to be called on rough play in the box, and it would make it less of a pure certain goal, because now people are so reluctant to make those calls. And you have plays like yesterday. It was a penalty. The Netherlands defender had her studs up almost shoulder high and struck the player, and that's a penalty. But it wasn't a play that was certainly going to lead to a goal necessarily. The American player had back to goal, was heading away from goal. It is one of the things that is not quite 100% satisfying to me as far as soccer is concerned. Not like it's automatic that you score on penalties, particularly in the women's game. England, for instance, missed 3 of them in this tournament, but Megan Rapinoe sure didn't. She had 3 of them, and she made them all. Not her greatest game on the wing, but when the big moments came for her, she was named the player of the match. I would not agree with that. I'll get to that in a minute. But anyway, that opened the game up. The U.S. took advantage and really totally dominated the game the rest of the way. Usually when a game opens up like that, the team that is trying to come back and scratch out a goal will at least carve out some real opportunities. And the United States just absolutely denied those, and in fact probably should have had 2 or maybe 3 more goals. But the second one that they did get was by Rose Lavelle, who was absolutely, positively my favorite player to watch in this tournament. Gangly, unorthodox, but her speedy runs at weaving through the defense, at times looking like she was about to fall down at any minute, were just really exciting to watch. She didn't always get the payoff, but in this particular game she did, and that second goal pretty much secured things, particularly as airtight as the United States was playing. And in the end, it was not really a dramatic game. U.S. took the drama out of the game the rest of the way. But when you were winning a championship and you were the best in the world and all the pressure is on you, and really nobody really likes the United States team outside the United States, but they have to admire them. They are confident. Some people call them cocky. That's supposed to be a criticism. I don't know why it would be a criticism, but the United States embraced it all, shook it off, and really just thumbed their nose at all the naysayers in winning their 4th World Cup. They are the best in the world. They are dominant in their sport. They are one of the best sports teams in their area of competition that you can absolutely have. They're inspiring. Is that maybe overdone a little bit at times in some of the Nike commercials and such? Yeah, I think it probably is, but certainly there's young girls who are going to want to be Rose Lavelle. They're going to want to be Megan Rapinoe, and they're going to try and grow up and be U.S. women's national team players, and really, really exciting moments, and the celebration went on. And as I mentioned in the Open, Kansas City really got a chance to shine during this tournament. And kudos to all the people who worked so hard to promote those watch parties down at the Power and Light, and really congratulations to the thousands of people who went and had a communal experience and had so much fun, and it made Kansas City look great. And they're probably memories for young people growing up and sharing with their parents and sharing with their friends that they'll always remember. And it was a pretty cool deal, to say the least. Well, sporting soccer fans finally got themselves a little reward on Saturday night. Certainly the weekend belonged to the women's national team, no question about that. But Sporting Kansas City needed a victory so badly, and they got it 1-0. It was kind of a typical Sporting game for this year, except they won it. That was the thing that was most important. First half was somewhat equal, probably a little bit of a edge in play to Sporting Kansas City, but they got the goal. And then in the second half, complete and utter domination from Sporting, but the inability to put the goal away. They probably should have scored Well, it's soccer. You don't put all your chances away, but they should have scored at least 3 or 4. They could have scored at least 6 or 7. They only got the 1, so they had to sweat out some moments late in the game, but they got the full 3 points. They needed it. They'll be back on the road for their next game, so the game was absolutely vital. Sporting still 4 points out of a playoff spot, but the real distaste of being the worst team in the Western Conference for the moment is alleviated anyway, and Sporting gets a win that can make their fans really, really happy. And I talked to a couple of real Sporting supporters, including some people who were at the game against LAFC when they were beaten so badly 5-1, and they were starting to question things. Has Peter Vermees lost his message after all these years? Things that really don't make that much sense necessarily, but are things that are brought up when you have such a promising season ahead of you. You're in CONCACAF Champions League. You say you construct this team to have both. Do they have explanations? Some would call it excuses to their play this year. They sure do. They've been ravaged by injuries, but now the team has started to get healthy, and all those injuries and all that lack of success had led to a lack of confidence from even the players who now were healthy and playing again. And they needed something good to happen, and they got it, and did it in the form of a clean sheet, of which they haven't had too many this year, only 4. That's something that has been a hallmark of this team before. And in the first game of the second half of the season, they get themselves an absolutely vital victory. So Sporting Kansas City 1-0 winners as they get Johan Quazé, who was inserted for Christian Nemeth in the striker's position for this game, gets the only goal of the game. Others could have scored. Daniel Shalloway certainly right now hasn't scored this year after getting 11 last year, and you can see the utter frustration for Shalloway, who had glorious opportunities in this game to score and couldn't do it. It would have been great to get him off the schneid as well, but it didn't happen. But the most important thing was getting the team off the schneid as they get the victory by a count of 1-0, absolutely vital for Sporting Kansas City. And the soccer weekend was, of course, capped off by the U.S. men's national team being in action as they took on mighty Mexico in the Gold Cup final. Certainly, this competition was not as important as the World Cup, but it was still a big competition for the United States, and it was a scintillating match. It was a scintillating match with real competitiveness in the first half as the two teams were very evenly matched before a sellout crowd in Chicago, and we'll get to that a little bit later on. In the second half, it was one-way traffic for the heavily favored Mexicans, but still the U.S. was holding still at 0-0 in the game. Finally, the Mexicans broke through with Jonathan Dos Santos scoring in the 73rd minute, and after that, the United States really didn't mount too much of a threat. In the first half, they did, and Christian Pulisic was dangerous, and the United States was playing on even terms. The second half looked more like what we would have expected from this game, with the Mexicans pouring on the heat, but not breaking through until that 73rd minute goal. In the end, it was a 1-0 victory for the Mexicans and a very competitive game for the U.S. national team. And all in all, it would be considered, I would say, a fairly satisfying Gold Cup. What the United States couldn't do was lose to one of the lesser lights in this competition, which basically has been won by the United States and Mexico each and every time, except for one time that Canada took the title in the 15 times the Gold Cup has been staged. And so the United States, which earlier in friendlies and some other competitions before the Gold Cup had not been looking very good under new coach Greg Burkhalter, they certainly looked better with a full squad, or relatively full squad, although they are missing some people due to injuries, as were the Mexicans. But it was a competitive Gold Cup and a competitive match against the Mexicans, a 1-0 defeat that I think many people would have thought would have been more lopsided. What was lopsided, and what certainly has to change if the United States is going to feel like they've made the progress that they should as far as interest in soccer is concerned, is the fact that 85 to 90% of the fans was filled with Mexican fans. This is no knock on the Mexican fans, who are great, obviously, but in a competition that's held in Chicago with the tickets available to everyone, certainly it's a bit of a stain on the interest in the U.S. men's national team that the stands were packed with Mexican fans. It was a totally lopsided home advantage for the Mexicans, and just think of the World Cup games in Paris, where thousands and thousands of Americans were in France, making each and every home game or game in France, including one in Paris against the French, seem like a home game, or at least a neutral atmosphere for the U.S. women's team. Obviously, Mexican interest is great. They have great history. They're a better team than the U.S. national team on a regular basis, but still, having that few American fans in a venue